Let us drift back, dear listener, to a sun-dappled afternoon in the French countryside, sometime in the early 1800s. The birds are singing, the fields are lush, and the air is filled with the gentle hum of summer. But today history is about to take a most unexpected turn, a turn that involves one of the world's most legendary leaders, a battalion of dignified generals, and, most importantly, a horde of very determined bunnies. Picture this Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of France, conqueror of nations. The very image of military genius has decided it is time for a break. No more maps and strategies, no more cannon fire or cavalry charges. Today he will indulge in a simple pleasure, a grand picnic and a rabbit hunt surrounded by his closest companions. The idea is innocent enough, a reward for his loyal officers, a moment of peace after so many campaigns. What could possibly go wrong? The scene is set on a sprawling estate, the grass trimmed and the trees swaying gently in the breeze. Long tables are draped with white linens laden with cheeses, breads and fruits. Servants bustle about, making sure every glass is filled and every plate is brimming. The generals, resplendent in their uniforms, exchange stories and laughter, their swords set aside for the day. And at the center of it all, Napoleon himself, his iconic hat perched at a jaunty angle, surveys the festivities with a rare, relaxed smile. But the true stars of our story are waiting just out of sight. Hundreds, yes, hundreds of rabbits gathered for the occasion are being kept in large wooden crates at the edge of the field. They twitch their noses, their ears flicking, perhaps sensing that something unusual is afoot. These are not wild rabbits, mind you, but domesticated ones collected from farms and villages nearby. Their job, at least according to the humans, is to be released into the field for a grand ceremonial hunt. The officers, armed with elegant walking sticks and the occasional net, are expecting a leisurely chase, a bit of sport, and perhaps a story to tell at dinner. But the bunnies have other plans. As the afternoon sun climbs higher, the time comes for the main event. The servants approach the crates fumbling with the latches. The generals gather in a loose semicircle. Napoleon at the front, ready to lead the charge. There is a moment of anticipation, a hush falling over the crowd. The latches are undone. The doors swing open. Chaos! At first, there is a ripple of movement, a soft rustling as the rabbits peer out into the bright sunlight. Then, as if by some secret signal, the entire horde surges forward, not away from the humans, as one might expect, but directly toward them. The field becomes a sea of fur and twitching noses, a stampede of bunnies with a singular, mysterious purpose. Napoleon, ever the strategist, is the first to notice that something is amiss. He takes a cautious step back as the front line of rabbits barrels toward his polished boots. The generals, caught off guard, attempt to maintain their dignity, but it is difficult to look dignified when you are being swarmed by a wave of determined lagomorphs. The bunnies are relentless. They leap, they bound, they scramble up trousers and over shoes. One particularly bold rabbit makes a beeline for Napoleon's coat, its tiny paws leaving dusty prints on the immaculate fabric. Another attempts to scale a general's leg, undeterred by the man's frantic attempts to shake it loose. The officers, who have faced cannonballs and cavalry, now find themselves utterly unprepared for the onslaught of soft, persistent fluff. What follows is a scene that defies belief. The most powerful men in Europe are reduced to a state of comic confusion, stumbling backward, waving their arms and calling for help. Some try to retreat behind the picnic tables, only to find the rabbits have already claimed the high ground, nibbling on the remains of the cheese platters. Others attempt to shoo the bunnies away with their hats, but the rabbits are having none of it. They are everywhere, underfoot, overhead, and in at least one case inside a general's coat pocket. Napoleon himself is soon surrounded. He attempts to issue orders, but his commands are drowned out by the squeals and shouts of his officers. The bunnies, undeterred by rank or reputation, press their advantage. One particularly enterprising rabbit hops onto a serving tray and launches itself at the emperor's lap, causing him to leap to his feet and nearly topple the entire table. The servants, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch in amazement, stand frozen at the edge of the chaos. The generals now thoroughly disheveled attempt to regroup, but the bunnies have seized the initiative. It is without a doubt the most successful charge of the day, and it belongs entirely to the rabbits. As the dust settles, the field is transformed. Where once there was order and decorum, there is now a landscape, dotted with toppled chairs, scattered food, and triumphant rabbits. The officers, their uniforms askew, and their pride-wounded exchange bewildered glances. Napoleon, brushing rabbit fur from his coat, cannot help but let out a rueful chuckle. It is perhaps the first time he has been so thoroughly outmaneuvered and by such unlikely opponents. And so, dear listener, as you drift towards sleep, imagine the sight: the mighty Emperor of France surrounded by a sea of bunnies, his army in disarray, his picnic in ruins. The sun sets on a day that will be remembered not for its glory or its grandeur, but for its gentle absurdity, a day when history was written not with swords or cannons, but with the soft patter of 1,000 tiny feet. Let the image linger. A field of contented rabbits nibbling at the remnants of a royal feast, while the greatest general of his age contemplates the mysteries of fate and the unpredictability of rabbits. In the end, perhaps there is a lesson here that even the most carefully laid plans can be undone by the simplest of creatures, and that sometimes the best stories are the ones that make us laugh. As the stars begin to twinkle overhead and the world grows quiet, remember, history is full of surprises, and sometimes the bunnies win. The field is still echoing with the echoes of the great bunny charge. What had begun as a stately afternoon of leisure for Napoleon and his officers has, in a matter of moments, transformed into a scene of pure, fluffy pandemonium. The bunnies, emboldened by their unexpected success, have not retreated. If anything, they have grown more adventurous. Let us pause and take in the tableau. Generals with medals askew, their boots scuffed and their dignity in tatters, are scattered across the grass. Some are perched precariously atop picnic tables, clutching at the edges as if expecting the tables themselves to float them to safety. Others have taken refuge behind overturned chairs, peering out warily as if the rabbits might suddenly sprout fangs and launch another offensive. Napoleon, meanwhile, stands at the center of it all, his bicorn hat slightly askew, his coat dusted with hay and a few errant tufts of rabbit fur. He surveys the battlefield with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant amusement. He has faced the armies of Europe, but never before has he encountered an enemy so relentless, so numerous, and, let's be honest, so adorable. The bunnies, for their part, seem to be having the time of their lives. Freed from their crates, they fan out across the field in search of adventure and, more importantly, snacks. Some make a beeline for the remains of the picnic, their noses twitching as they discover a veritable wonderland of bread, cheese, and fruit. Others, emboldened by their earlier success, continue to investigate the humans, hopping onto laps, sniffing at boots, and, in one memorable case, attempting to nest inside a General Shako. The officers, in their confusion, attempt to restore order. General Bertrand, ever the disciplinarian, tries to rally the troops. "Gentlemen, maintain your composure," he bellows, swatting gently at a particularly persistent rabbit that has taken a liking to his epaulettes. His words, however, are lost in the general commotion. General Duroc, usually the very model of calm, is seen tiptoeing across the grass, his arms held high as if wading through deep water, while a trio of bunnies trails faithfully at his heels. The servants, caught between duty and disbelief, do their best to salvage what they can. One attempts to shoo the rabbits away from the dessert table with a folded napkin, only to find himself surrounded by a circle of curious, unblinking eyes. Another, braver than most, tries to scoop up a particularly chubby bunny, only for it to wriggle free and dart off toward the punch bowl. Meanwhile, the bunnies have discovered the bread basket. To their delight, it is filled with crusty baguettes and soft rolls, perfect for nibbling. A small group forms a bunny conga line, each taking a turn to tug at a loaf twice its size. Another contingent discovers a wheel of cheese and sets about gnawing at the edges, leaving a trail of tiny teeth marks in the rind. Napoleon, ever the observer, watches as his officers attempt to regain control. He cannot help but marvel at the sheer determination of the rabbits. Perhaps he muses aloud, "We should recruit them for the next campaign." His officers, too busy fending off the furry invaders, do not respond. The chaos soon spreads beyond the picnic area. A group of bunnies, emboldened by their success, makes a daring dash towards the carriages parked at the edge of the field. The horses, unaccustomed to such boldness from creatures so small, snort and stamp nervously. One particularly adventurous rabbit hops onto the wheel of Napoleon's own carriage, prompting the driver to leap down and attempt a rescue. The result is a brief but spirited chase, with the rabbit darting beneath the carriage and the driver circling helplessly, much to the amusement of the onlookers. Elsewhere, a group of officers has formed a defensive circle, their backs to each other, hats held aloft like shields. They peer anxiously at the advancing bunnies, who seem entirely unimpressed by the display. One rabbit, perhaps sensing an opportunity, hops directly into the center of the circle and begins grooming itself, utterly unconcerned by the humans' attempts at intimidation. As the minutes tick by, the chaos shows no sign of abating. The picnic, once a model of order and refinement, has become a playground for rabbits and a source of endless embarrassment for the French military elite. The generals, their uniforms now more fur than fabric, exchange glances that say, "Let us never speak of this again." But the bunnies are not finished yet. Having conquered the food and the humans, they turn their attention to the decorative centerpieces. Bouquets of wildflowers are quickly dismantled petals scattered across the grass. A particularly artistic rabbit arranges a pile of leaves into what can only be described as a bunny-sized nest, settling in for a well-earned nap. Napoleon, watching all this unfold, cannot help but laugh. It is a rare moment of levity in a life otherwise filled with battles and burdens. For a brief, shining afternoon, the cares of empire fade away, replaced by the simple, irresistible chaos of a bunny stampede. As the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, the officers make one last valiant attempt to restore order. General Bertrand, his dignity hanging by a thread, stands atop a table and attempts to deliver a speech. "Gentlemen, let us remember who we are. We are the finest army in Europe, We cannot be bested by. He is interrupted by a rabbit, hopping onto the table beside him and nibbling at his sash. The audience dissolves into laughter and the speech is abandoned. In the end, it is clear that the bunnies have won the day. The officers, exhausted and defeated, slump onto the grass, their uniforms in disarray. The servants, having given up all hope of salvaging the picnic, sit at the edge of the field and watch as the rabbits frolic in the fading light. Napoleon, ever the philosopher, reflects on the day's events. It seems, my friends, he says, that victory is not always a matter of strength or strategy. Sometimes it belongs to those who are most persistent and most adorable. The field, once a stage for military might, is now a playground for rabbits. The generals, humbled by their defeat, vow to keep the story a secret. But as the bunnies settle in for the evening, it is clear that this is a tale that will be told and retold for years to come. And so, as night falls and the stars begin to twinkle overhead, the camp grows quiet once more. The officers, their pride wounded, but their spirits oddly lifted, drift off to sleep to the gentle sounds of rabbits munching on the last of the bread. The great bunny chaos has come to an end, at least for now. But somewhere in the heart of the French countryside, a legend is born the day Napoleon and his mighty army were bested by a horde of bunnies. Let that image carry you gently into sleep. The world's greatest general surrounded by soft, triumphant rabbits, his army in disarray, and the field filled with laughter and the quiet rustle of fur. For in the end, history is not just a record of battles and conquests, but also of moments of unexpected joy and the occasional unforgettable chaos brought about by a determined band of bunnies. As the sun began its slow descent behind the rolling French hills, the field that had once been a vision of imperial order was now a patchwork of toppled tables, scattered bread crusts, and triumphant, well-fed rabbits. The laughter and chaos of the great bunny charge still echoed in the air, but now a new mood was settling over the scene. A mood of retreat, of humble withdrawal, and of quiet, fluffy victory. Napoleon Bonaparte, usually the calm center of any storm, found himself at the very heart of this most peculiar defeat. His officers, those proud generals who had once led men into battle, had been reduced to a ragtag group of bunny dodgers, their uniforms decorated with hay and the occasional carrot top. The servants, who had once glided gracefully between tables, now tiptoed nervously, wary of crossing the path of a particularly assertive rabbit. And the bunnies. They were everywhere. Some lounged on the remnants of the picnic blankets, their bellies round and content. Others continued their explorations, sniffing at boots, nuzzling at coat-tails, and, in at least one case, attempting to burrow into the folds of Napoleon's cloak. It was clear to all present the field no longer belonged to the Emperor of France. It belonged to the bunnies. Napoleon, ever the tactician, quickly assessed his options. He could attempt to rally his men, though a quick glance at their disheveled state suggested that morale was at an all-time low. He could try to reason with the bunnies, but their twitching noses and unblinking stares offered little hope of negotiation. Or he could do what any wise leader would do in the face of overwhelming, adorable opposition: retreat with dignity. He signaled to his carriage, a stately affair, drawn by 2 elegant horses. The driver, who had spent the better part of the afternoon fending off curious rabbits from the wheels, quickly snapped to attention. The officers, sensing their chance for escape, began to gather their things, hats, swords, and, in one case, a half-eaten baguette that a rabbit had graciously left behind. But the bunnies were not about to let their guests depart so easily. As Napoleon made his way towards the carriage, a small battalion of rabbits formed a living barricade across his path. They sat in a neat row, ears perked, eyes wide, as if to say, "And where do you think you're going?" One particularly bold bunny hopped forward and gave Napoleon's boot a gentle nudge, as if demanding a toll for passage. The emperor paused, considering his options. He could step over the rabbits, but that seemed both undignified and likely to provoke further bunny mischief. He could attempt to bribe them with the remains of the cheese platter, but the rabbits had already demonstrated a complete lack of respect for imperial authority or for cheese-based diplomacy. Instead, Napoleon did what any great leader must do in the face of the unexpected. He adapted. With a theatrical sigh, he knelt down and, in a gesture that would have shocked the courts of Europe, offered the bold bunny a small piece of apple from his pocket. The rabbit accepted the gift with regal composure, then hopped aside, clearing the way for the emperor. The officers, inspired by Napoleon's example, began to distribute the last of the picnic treats among the rabbits. A general offered a strawberry to a particularly chubby bunny, who accepted it with a look of utter contentment. Another officer, perhaps hoping to curry favor with the new rulers of the field, presented a crust of bread to a group of young rabbits who immediately set upon it with enthusiastic nibbles. With the bunnies thus appeased, the path to the carriage was finally clear. Napoleon, brushing a few stray tufts of fur from his coat, climbed aboard with as much dignity as he could muster. The officers followed their uniforms, rumpled, but their spirits oddly buoyed by the absurdity of the day. The driver cracked his whip, and the carriage began to roll slowly away from the field. But the bunnies were not finished yet. As the horses trotted forward, a wave of rabbits surged after the carriage, their little legs pumping furiously. It was as if they sensed that this was their moment, their chance to chase history itself. The officers peering out the windows watched in amazement as the rabbits kept pace with the carriage. Some bunnies leapt and bounded alongside the wheels, their ears flapping in the breeze. Others formed a loose hopping parade behind the retreating vehicle, their numbers growing with every passing moment. Napoleon, ever the strategist, could not help but admire their persistence. "If only my cavalry had such spirit," he mused, watching as a particularly determined bunny kept pace with the carriage for nearly 100 yards before finally veering off in pursuit of a stray grape. The retreat continued, the carriage rolling gently over the rutted country road, the officers inside exchanging stories of the day's events. Some tried to downplay their own encounters with the bunnies, insisting that they had merely been supervising the situation. Others, unable to contain their laughter, recounted in vivid detail the moment when a rabbit had commandeered a general's hat, or when a group of bunnies had staged a daring raid on the dessert table. Outside, the countryside slipped past in a blur of green fields and golden sunlight. The sounds of the picnic laughter, shouts, the occasional indignant squeak faded into the distance, replaced by the steady clop of hooves and the gentle rumble of wheels. But every so often a flash of white fur would appear at the side of the road, a reminder that the bunnies were never far behind. As the carriage neared the edge of the estate, Napoleon allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had faced many challenges in his life, armies, alliances, the fickle tides of fortune. But never before had he encountered an opponent so relentless, so unpredictable, and so thoroughly unconcerned with the rules of war. And yet, as he gazed out at the setting sun, Napoleon felt a strange sense of peace. The bunnies, in their own way, had reminded him of something important, that even the greatest plans can be undone by the smallest of surprises, and that sometimes the best thing to do is simply to retreat with grace. Behind the carriage, the last of the rabbits watched as their guests disappeared into the distance. Some returned to the remains of the picnic content to nibble on the leftovers. Others gathered in small groups, their noses twitching as they discussed the events of the day in the secret language of rabbits. For the officers, the retreat was both a relief and a lesson in humility. They had faced defeat before, but never at the paws of such determined adversaries. As they rode in silence, the gentle rocking of the carriage and the soft evening air lulled them into a state of drowsy contentment. Napoleon, too, felt the weight of the day's events slipping away. The chaos and confusion, the laughter and embarrassment all faded into the gentle rhythm of the journey home. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to drift to the image of the bunnies, fearless, unstoppable, and utterly adorable, dancing in his mind. And so, as night fell, and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, the emperor and his officers retreated from the field of battle, their pride bruised, but their spirits lightened by the absurdity of it all. The bunnies, victorious and unchallenged, claimed the field as their own, their soft footsteps a quiet reminder that history is full of surprises. Let that image carry you gently into sleep, a carriage rolling through the twilight, a field of contented rabbits, and the world's greatest general learning. At last, that sometimes the only sensible strategy is a graceful retreat. For in the end, even the mightiest must yield to the unexpected, and sometimes the bunnies win. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the French countryside, the field that had witnessed the most unusual of battles grew quiet once more. The bunnies, now full and content, burrowed into the soft grass and nibbled on the final crumbs of the imperial picnic. The air was still, save for the occasional rustle of a rabbit settling in for the night. But though the chaos had ended, the story of what happened that day was just beginning to take on a life of its own. A night of reflection. Back at the estate, Napoleon and his officers gathered in the drawing room. The grandeur of the space-polished wood, gilded mirrors, velvet drapes, stood in stark contrast to the state of its occupants. Uniforms were rumpled, boots were muddy, and more than one officer was still picking bits of hay from his hair. The servants, ever discreet, did their best not to smile as they served tea and pastries to the weary warriors. Napoleon, for his part, was unusually quiet. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, his mind replaying the afternoon's events in all their absurd glory. The Emperor of France, outwitted by rabbits, it was almost too ridiculous to believe. And yet the memory of those twitching noses and fearless little paws brought a reluctant smile to his lips. General Bertrand, ever the loyal second in command, attempted to restore some dignity to the proceedings. "Gentlemen," he declared, "let us agree that today's events were an anomaly, a curiosity, not to be repeated, and certainly not to be discussed outside these walls." There were murmurs of agreement, though one or two officers could not suppress a quiet chuckle. But even as they tried to downplay the incident, the story was already beginning to spread. The tale escapes. It started innocently enough. A servant tasked with cleaning up the remains of the picnic recounted the scene to a stable boy, who in turn shared it with the cook. By the next morning, the tale had reached the nearby village, where it was met with disbelief, laughter, and more than a little embellishment. "Did you hear?" whispered one market vendor to another. "The emperor himself chased from the field by a horde of rabbits. They say he barely escaped with his hat." The story grew with each telling. In one version, the rabbits had formed a perfect military formation, advancing on Napoleon with the precision of an elite regiment. In another, The emperor had been forced to surrender his sword to the leader of the Bunnies, a particularly plump fellow with a patch over one eye. Soon the tale crossed the boundaries of the estate and began to travel further afield. Couriers and merchants carried it to nearby towns, where it was greeted with delight. The idea of the great Napoleon, conqueror of Europe, being bested by a band of bunnies was simply too delicious to keep secret. The officer's dilemma. For the officers, the growing legend was a source of both embarrassment and amusement. Some tried to deny their involvement, insisting that they had been indisposed that afternoon or had left the picnic early. Others, unable to resist the humor of the situation, began to embrace their roles in the story. General Duroc, who had spent a good portion of the day fending off rabbits from his boots, became something of a local celebrity. Children would follow him through the village, giggling and asking if he had brought any bunnies with him. Duroc, ever the good sport, would tip his hat and reply, "Not today, my friends." But one must always be on guard. Even the servants, usually so reserved, found themselves swept up in the excitement. The chef composed a special lapin à la Napoleon for the next banquet, though in a show of solidarity with their new furry overlords, no actual rabbit was harmed in its making. Napoleon's response. Napoleon himself was not immune to the growing legend. At first, he tried to ignore the whispers and the knowing smiles. But as the days passed, he found that the story had a life of its own. Letters from distant relatives arrived, each one containing a sly reference to the brave defenders of the carrot patch. Foreign dignitaries visiting the court would offer polite but unmistakable inquiries about the newest addition to the French cavalry. At first, Napoleon bristled at the jokes. He was, after all, a man of great pride and ambition, but over time he began to see the humor in the situation. After all, if history was to remember him better, it be with a smile than a scowl. One evening, as he dined with his officers, Napoleon raised his glass and declared, "To our most formidable opponents, may they always find fields to conquer and picnics to disrupt." The room erupted in laughter, and from that moment on, the bunny incident became a cherished, if slightly embarrassing, part of their shared history. The legend grows. As the weeks passed, the story continued to grow. Artists began to paint whimsical scenes of the battle, depicting Napoleon fleeing before a tide of rabbits, his hat askew and his sword raised in mock surrender. Poets composed verses in honor of the Bunny Brigade, and musicians wrote jaunty tunes that were soon whistled in every tavern. Even the local children joined in the fun. They organized their own bunny hunts, with one child playing the role of Napoleon and the rest donning makeshift bunny ears. The bunnies would chase the emperor around the village square, much to the delight of the watching parents. In time, the story reached Paris, where it was greeted with a mixture of disbelief and delight. Some dismissed it as mere rumor, while others insisted that it was proof of Napoleon's humility and good humor. Satirical newspapers published cartoons of the emperor surrounded by rabbits, each one more exaggerated than the last. A gentle legacy. Despite the initial embarrassment, the bunny incident became a source of gentle amusement for all involved. It was a reminder that even the greatest among us are not immune to the whims of fate or to the charms of a determined rabbit. For Napoleon and his officers, the story became a cherished memory, a symbol of camaraderie and laughter in the midst of a life otherwise filled with seriousness and strife. For the villagers, it was a tale to be told and retold, a source of pride and amusement for generations to come. And for the bunnies, it was simply another day in the sun, a day when they claimed the field the feast, and, for a brief, shining moment, the hearts of an empire, drifting to sleep. So, as you drift off to sleep, imagine the gentle spread of this legend from a quiet field in the French countryside to the grand halls of Paris, from whispered jokes among servants to the laughter of children in the square. Imagine Napoleon, once the terror of Europe, now remembered with a smile his greatest defeat, softened by the softest of adversaries. Let the image linger. A world where even the mightiest can be humbled, where laughter outlasts embarrassment, and where the legend of the Bunny Horde grows with each retelling. For in the end, perhaps the greatest victories are those that bring us together in joy, and the most enduring legends are those that make us laugh. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with gentle fields, warm sunlight, and the quiet triumph of 1,000 happy bunnies. As the weeks and months slipped past, the story of Napoleon's unexpected defeat at the paws of 1,000 bunnies did not fade into obscurity. Instead, it blossomed, growing ever more colorful and outlandish with each retelling. What began as a curious anecdote from a countryside picnic soon transformed into a legend that hopped and skipped its way across Europe, fueled by laughter, imagination, and the irresistible charm of rabbits. The tale takes on a life of its own. In the days following the Great Bunny Charge, the story was already being retold in nearby villages. But as it traveled from mouth to mouth, it began to change. Details became exaggerated, heroes and villains emerged, and the bunnies themselves took on almost mythical qualities. By the time the tale reached the bustling streets of Paris, it had grown in the telling. No longer was it simply a matter of rabbits overrunning a picnic. Now it was a full-blown epic, complete with daring bunny generals, cunning rabbit tacticians, and a Napoleon, who, depending on the storyteller, either fled in terror or attempted unsuccessfully to negotiate a peace treaty with the furry invaders. Children gathered in city squares to act out the story, donning paper hats and makeshift bunny ears. In these playful reenactments, the Bunny Brigade always emerged victorious, their soft paws and twitching noses proving mightier than any sword or strategy. Artistic interpretations, from canvases to caricatures, artists ever eager for inspiration found the bunny incident irresistible. Soon paintings and sketches began to appear in shop windows and salons. Some works depicted the event with gentle humor, Napoleon hat askew, surrounded by a sea of fluffy rabbits, his officers waving white napkins in surrender. Others took a more fantastical approach. In one popular painting, the rabbits were shown forming perfect military ranks, their ears standing at attention as they charged across the field. Another depicted a council of wise old bunnies gathered around a map, plotting their next move against the unsuspecting humans. Caricaturists, those masters of exaggeration, had a field day. Satirical newspapers in Paris and London published cartoons showing Napoleon being chased up a tree by a swarm of rabbits, or attempting to bribe a particularly stern-looking bunny with a medal from his own chest. In some drawings, the rabbits wore tiny uniforms and bicorn hats, their expressions every bit as determined as the emperor's. These images, both gentle and ridiculous, soon became the talk of the town. They were reproduced on postcards, tea towels, and even the occasional decorative plate. It seemed that everywhere one looked, a bunny or 100 was never far behind. Poems, songs, and tall tales, the legend of the Bunny Horde was not confined to visual art. Poets and songwriters, inspired by the absurdity of the tale, composed verses and ballads in honor of the furry victors. One popular ditty sung in taverns from Normandy to Nice went something like this. Oh, Napoleon marched with his men so grand to picnic and hunt in the green French land. But the bunnies arose a soft fluffy tide, and the emperor fled with his pride set aside. Children sang their own versions, inventing ever more elaborate details. Bunnies wielding tiny swords, rabbits riding on the backs of chickens, and a wise old hare who outwitted Napoleon at every turn. Storytellers, never content with mere facts, began to add their own embellishments. In some versions, the rabbits were said to be the enchanted guardians of the field, sent to test the humility of great men. In others, the leader of the bunnies, a mysterious white rabbit with a patch over one eye, became a folk hero in his own right, known as Le Général Lapin, the bunny, as meme, early modern style. While the word meme would not be coined for centuries, the spirit of mimetic storytelling was alive and well in early 19th century Europe. The story of the Bunny Horde leapt from person to person, from town to town, changing and multiplying as it went. In the salons of Paris, witty hosts would challenge their guests to invent new verses or draw fresh caricatures of the event. In the countryside, farmers claimed their own rabbits were descendants of the legendary Napoleonic Brigade, and children would boast that their family's bunny was the very one who had chased the emperor from the field. Even in the courts of Europe, the story found eager audiences. Ambassadors and dignitaries, always on the lookout for a good-natured jest, would exchange bunny-themed gifts, porcelain rabbits, embroidered handkerchiefs, and, on one memorable occasion, a carrot-shaped snuff box presented to a visiting French general. International spread and adaptation. The legend did not remain confined to France. British newspapers, ever eager to poke fun at their old adversary, seized upon the story with glee. In London, satirical prints showed Napoleon besieged not by armies, but by a relentless tide of rabbits. One particularly popular cartoon depicted the emperor attempting to cross the English Channel, only to be turned back by a fleet of bunny-piloted boats. In Germany, the story took on a more philosophical tone. Writers mused on the unpredictability of fate, using the bunny incident as a metaphor for the folly of human pride. If even Napoleon can be humbled by rabbits, one essayist wrote, then surely we are all at the mercy of life's little surprises. In Russia, where tales of cunning animals were already popular, the story was woven into existing folklore. The Napoleon and the Bunnies fable joined the ranks of stories about clever foxes and wise bears, a gentle reminder that sometimes the smallest creatures can teach the greatest lessons. The Bunny Brigade in popular culture. As the years passed, the legend of the Bunny Horde became a fixture of popular culture. Festive parades featured children dressed as rabbits, reenacting the famous charge with much hopping and laughter. Bakeries sold Napoleon's defeat pastries, flaky carrot-shaped confections filled with sweet cream. Toy makers produced plush rabbits in tiny military uniforms, complete with miniature medals and hats. These Bunny Brigade toys became cherished keepsakes, passed down from one generation to the next. Even the world of fashion was touched by the legend. For a brief period, it became fashionable among Parisian ladies to wear hats adorned with rabbit ears, a playful nod to the most famous defeat in French history, Napoleon's own take. As for Napoleon himself, he could not escape the legend no matter how far he traveled. Wherever he went, the story followed, sometimes as a joke, sometimes as a gentle reminder of the day when fate, in the form of 1,000 bunnies, had turned the tables. Eventually, even the emperor learned to laugh at the tale. At formal dinners, he would occasionally raise a glass and toast to our most persistent adversaries. The officers would join in, and for a moment the room would echo with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Some say that in his later years, Napoleon kept a small porcelain rabbit on his desk, a token of humility and a reminder that even the greatest plans can be undone by the most unexpected of foes, the gentle power of laughter. What was it about this story that captured the hearts and imaginations of so many? Perhaps it was the gentle absurdity of it all. The idea that the mighty could be humbled not by war or politics, but by a tide of soft, determined rabbits. Perhaps it was the way the legend brought people together, inviting them to laugh at themselves and at the unpredictable nature of life. Or perhaps it was simply the charm of the bunnies themselves, their innocence and persistence, a balm in a world too often troubled by seriousness. Whatever the reason, the legend endured. It became a story told at bedtime, a joke shared among friends, a symbol of the power of humility and humor. Drifting into dreamland. So, as you close your eyes tonight, let your thoughts wander to a world where bunnies wear medals and generals flee before a tide of fluff. Imagine the laughter of children, the twinkle in Napoleon's eye, and the gentle rustle of rabbits in the grass. Let the legend of the Bunny Brigade carry you into sleep. A reminder that history is not only made by battles and kings, but also by moments of joy, laughter, and the soft, persistent power of a determined bunny. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with gentle fields, warm sunlight, and the quiet triumph of 1,000 happy rabbits. Let us drift back in time to the days before the bunny charge, before the chaos and the laughter, to a moment when the world was calm and the fields of France glowed golden under the summer sun. In this tranquil setting, the seeds of one of history's most peculiar episodes were quietly being sown, not by fate or mischief, but by the simple desire for a pleasant afternoon in the countryside. The Emperor's need for respite. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, was a man of action, ambition, and, on rare occasions, appreciation for the quieter pleasures of life. After years of campaigns, treaties, and the endless clatter of military boots, even the greatest general sometimes longed for a day without maps or dispatches, a day spent not in the company of soldiers, but of friends. It was in the gentle lull between campaigns with the Empire at relative peace that Napoleon decided to reward his most loyal officers with a day of relaxation. The idea was simple, yet grand: a picnic on the lush grounds of a noble estate, complete with fine food, good wine, and the jovial company of men who had stood by his side through thick and thin. But Napoleon, never one to do things by halves, wished to add a touch of sport to the occasion. And so the plan was hatched. After the meal, the officers would enjoy a rabbit hunt, a tradition among the French nobility, and a pastime that promised both excitement and amusement. Planning the perfect picnic. No imperial event was ever left to chance, and Napoleon's picnic would be no exception. The task of organizing the day fell to a team of trusted aides and servants who set about their work with the precision of a military campaign. First, the location. A sprawling estate just outside Paris, famed for its rolling meadows, ancient trees, and the gentle curve of a sparkling stream. The estate's owner, delighted to host the emperor, spared no expense in preparing the grounds. Lawns were trimmed, flower beds refreshed, and a grand pavilion erected to provide shade from the summer sun. Next came the menu. No ordinary picnic would do for the emperor and his retinue. The finest chefs in France were summoned, and together they devised a feast fit for royalty. baskets of fresh bread and pastries, wheels of creamy cheese, platters of roasted meats and bowls overflowing with ripe fruit were prepared. Crystal decanters of wine and lemonade stood ready to quench the thirst of even the most seasoned campaigner. Tables were draped in white linen, adorned with bouquets of wildflowers and silver candlesticks. Cushions and rugs were scattered across the grass for those who preferred to lounge in the shade. Servants in crisp uniforms moved silently about, ensuring that every detail was perfect. The guest list, only the most trusted and celebrated officers were invited to this exclusive affair. Generals who had ridden with Napoleon across Europe, aides de camp who had delivered messages through storms and gunfire, and a handful of dignitaries who had earned the emperor's respect. Each guest received a handwritten invitation sealed with the imperial crest. The message was clear. This was not a day for politics or planning, but for friendship, laughter, and the simple joys of summer. The officers accustomed to the rigors of campaign life greeted the prospect of a picnic with delight. Some dusted off their finest uniforms, others polished their boots until they shone. All looked forward to a day free from the burdens of command. The hunt is arranged, of course. The highlight of the day would be the rabbit hunt. In the days leading up to the event, arrangements were made to ensure that the hunt would be both entertaining and successful. Local farmers were commissioned to provide a suitable number of rabbits, enough to guarantee sport, but not so many as to overwhelm the guests. Special enclosures were built at the edge of the field where the rabbits would be kept safe and comfortable until the appointed hour. The officers, many of whom had little experience with hunting, were issued elegant walking sticks and nets rather than firearms. The goal was not to harm the rabbits, but to enjoy the chase, to test one's agility and wit against the nimblest of foes. There were even whispers of a prize for the officer who proved most adept at catching a rabbit. A golden carrot crafted by the imperial jeweler to be awarded at the evening's banquet. The day dawns. At last, the day of the picnic arrived. The sun rose bright and clear, casting a warm glow over the estate. Servants bustled about, laying out the final touches. The chefs arranged their creations on the tables. The wine was chilled, and the rabbits, unaware of the role they were about to play in history, dozed peacefully in their enclosures. The guests arrived in carriages, greeted by the scent of fresh grass and the sound of birdsong. Laughter echoed across the lawns as old friends reunited, sharing stories of past campaigns and hopes for the future. Napoleon himself arrived in style, his carriage drawn by the finest horses in the land. He stepped onto the grass with a rare, unguarded smile, greeting each guest by name and thanking them for their service. For a moment, he was not the emperor, but simply a man among friends, enjoying the pleasures of a summer's day. The atmosphere of anticipation. As the morning gave way to afternoon, the mood grew ever more festive. The officers sampled delicacies from every corner of France, sipped fine wine, and competed in friendly games of boules and cards. Some lounged in the shade, others strolled along the river bank, their laughter mingling with the gentle rustle of leaves. The rabbits, for their part, remained the center of curiosity. Officers would wander over to the enclosures, peering in at the furry creatures within. Some made bets on which rabbit would prove the fastest, others attempted to guess how many bunnies were present. The rabbits, oblivious to the attention, nibbled on clover and groomed their soft fur. As the hour of the hunt approached, a sense of anticipation filled the air. The officers exchanged boasts and friendly jibes, each one confident that he would emerge victorious. Napoleon, ever the competitor, declared with a wink that he would catch the first rabbit himself, a gentle prelude. Looking back, It is easy to see the innocence of the moment, the calm before the storm. No one could have guessed that this idyllic scene would soon give way to chaos, that the laughter of the officers would be replaced by shouts of surprise, or that the rabbits, so small and unassuming, would soon write their own chapter in the annals of history. But for now, all was peace and promise. The sun shone, the wine flowed, and the emperor's picnic seemed destined to be remembered as a day of joy and camaraderie, drifting into sleep. As you close your eyes tonight, let your thoughts wander to that golden afternoon. The gentle hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the soft rustle of rabbits in the grass. Imagine the emperor, relaxed and smiling, surrounded by friends, and the simple pleasures of summer. Let the calm and anticipation of the emperor's picnic carry you into sleep, a reminder that even the grandest plans can begin with the simplest of joys, and that history is often made not by battles and conquests, but by the quiet moments that come before. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with gentle fields, warm sunlight, and the promise of unexpected adventure. Before the sunlit chaos of the bunny charge, before the laughter and the legends, there was a quieter, almost comical operation unfolding behind the scenes, the great bunny gathering. For an event as grand as the emperor's picnic, nothing could be left to chance, not even the rabbits themselves. The imperial request. It all began with a simple request. Napoleon, ever the planner, had instructed his aides that the afternoon's entertainment would include a rabbit hunt. The order was clear. Ensure there are plenty of rabbits. The officers must not be disappointed. But how many rabbits exactly would be enough for the emperor and his retinue? 100. As it turned out, more than a few, far more. The responsibility fell to the estate's steward, Monsieur Fournier, a man renowned for his organizational skills and his impressive collection of hats. Fournier understood that when the emperor made a request, it was not to be taken lightly. He set about his task with the seriousness of a general preparing for battle. The bunny hunt begins. The first step was to contact the local farmers. Letters were dispatched to every village within a day's ride, each one bearing the imperial seal and a polite but unmistakable sense of urgency. The emperor requires rabbits. As many as you can provide. Kindly deliver them to the estate by Friday. The farmers, accustomed to the occasional royal request, were nonetheless surprised by the scale of this one. Some scratched their heads and wondered if the emperor was planning a feast. Others, more entrepreneurial, saw an opportunity and began rounding up every rabbit they could find. Pet rabbits, farm rabbits, even a few wild ones, coaxed from the hedgerows with promises of carrots and clover. Soon carts began to arrive at the estate, each one laden with wooden crates and wicker baskets. The air was filled with the soft thumping of rabbit feet and the occasional indignant squeak. The servants, unused to handling such lively cargo, did their best to keep order, though more than one crate was upended by a particularly spirited bunny. The count rose as the rabbits arrived. Monsieur Fournier oversaw their inspection with the precision of a customs officer. Each crate was opened, each rabbit counted and examined. "We must have enough for everyone," he declared, "and a few extra just in case." The rabbits came in all shapes and sizes, plump white bunnies with pink eyes, sleek grey rabbits with twitching noses, and a handful of mottled brown hares who looked upon the proceedings with regal disdain. Some were content to nibble on the hay provided. Others seemed determined to escape at the first opportunity. By the end of the day, the tally stood at over 300 rabbits, a number that seemed to Monsieur Fournier both impressive and faintly alarming. "Surely this will suffice," he muttered, eyeing the bustling enclosures with a mixture of pride and apprehension. The great bunny sorting, with so many rabbits organization, was essential. The servants constructed a series of pens at the edge of the field, each one labeled with a neat sign, small, medium, large, and for the more energetic specimens, especially lively. The rabbits were sorted with care. The smallest bunnies, too young or timid for the hunt, were given a special pen filled with soft grass and extra treats. The largest, most robust rabbits were placed in a sturdy enclosure, their strength respected by all who passed. A few rabbits defied categorization altogether. One, a particularly fluffy fellow with a penchant for mischief, managed to escape 3 times in as many hours, earning himself a private pen and the nickname Le Houdini. Another, a dignified old doe, seemed content to preside over the proceedings from a shady corner, her calm presence soothing both rabbits and humans alike. Feeding time. Follies, feeding 300 rabbits was no small task. The kitchen staff, more accustomed to preparing soufflés than rabbit chow, found themselves chopping mountains of carrots, apples, and leafy greens. Buckets of water were fetched, and the bunnies dined in style, their whiskers twitching in satisfaction. The officers, curious about the preparations, would occasionally wander over to observe the spectacle. General Duroc, ever the animal lover, attempted to befriend a group of young rabbits with a handful of lettuce. The bunnies, unimpressed by his military rank, accepted the offering and promptly ignored him. Some of the younger aides, eager to impress, volunteered for bunny duty. They spent their afternoons herding rabbits, repairing pens, and learning the hard way that a determined bunny can slip through the smallest of gaps. Laughter echoed across the field as one aide, in hot pursuit of a runaway, tripped over his own boots and landed in a heap, only to find the rabbit sitting calmly on his chest as if to say, "Better luck next time." The bunny census. As the day of the picnic approached, Monsieur Fournier conducted a final census. He walked the rows of pens, clipboard in hand, counting and recounting, making careful notes. 327, he announced at last, not including Le Houdini, who is somewhere. The servants exchanged weary smiles. The rabbits, oblivious to the fuss, continued their feast blissfully, unaware of the role they were about to play in history. The night before, on the eve of the picnic, the estate was abuzz with anticipation. The tables were set, the food prepared, and the rabbits, now the subject of much speculation, settled in for the night. The moon rose over the fields, casting a silver glow on the pens where hundreds of furry shapes huddled together, dreaming of carrots and clover. Monsieur Fournier, exhausted but satisfied, took one last walk among the enclosures. He paused to watch the rabbits, their soft breaths rising and falling in the quiet night. "Sleep well, little ones," he murmured. "Tomorrow you meet the Emperor," a gentle prelude to chaos. Looking back, it is easy to see the humor in the great bunny gathering. The frantic preparations, the unexpected escapes, the sheer abundance of fluff. It was a scene of gentle chaos, a prelude to the far greater chaos that was to come. But for those who were there, it was also a moment of camaraderie and laughter, a reminder that even the grandest plans rely on the smallest of details and the smallest of creatures. Drifting into sleep. As you close your eyes tonight, let your thoughts wander to that field of rabbits, the soft rustle of hay, the gentle thump of bunny feet, the laughter of aides and servants as they chase runaway bunnies under the stars. Let the memory of the great bunny gathering carry you into sleep, a reminder that history is not only made by emperors and generals, but by the quiet, whimsical moments that come before. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with gentle fields, moonlit nights, and the soft, persistent magic of 1,000 happy rabbits. The sun rose bright and golden over the estate, casting a warm glow across the dew-kissed grass and the fluttering banners that marked the day of the Emperor's grand picnic. The air was alive with the gentle hum of anticipation, the kind that comes before a celebration when everything's in its place and everyone is waiting for something wonderful to begin. The morning of the hunt. From the earliest hours, the estate was a hive of activity. Servants moved quietly and efficiently, their arms laden with baskets of fresh bread, platters of cheese, and pitchers of lemonade. The chefs, having worked through the night, arranged their culinary masterpieces on long tables draped in white linen. The scent of pastries and roasting meats mingled with the sweet perfume of wildflowers, creating an aroma that drifted through the open windows and out into the fields. The officers, eager for a day of leisure, arrived in their finest uniforms, coats, pressed boots, polished, and medals gleaming in the morning sun. There was an air of friendly competition as they greeted one another, each man convinced that he would be the day's champion, the one to catch the most rabbits and earn the Emperor's praise. Napoleon himself arrived with characteristic flair, stepping from his carriage with a smile and a tip of his iconic hat. He greeted his officers with warmth, his usual reserve softened by the promise of a day free from the burdens of command. For once, the Emperor was not a conqueror or a strategist, but simply a host eager to share good food and good company. The picnic grounds. The picnic was set in a wide, sunlit meadow, bordered by tall oaks and a sparkling stream. Tables were arranged in a semicircle, each one adorned with bouquets of wildflowers and delicate china. Cushions and rugs were scattered across the grass, inviting guests to lounge and enjoy the gentle breeze. At the edge of the field, the rabbit enclosures stood ready, each one bustling with activity. The bunnies, now well fed and rested after their great gathering, peered curiously through the slats, their noses twitching at the unfamiliar sights and sounds. Some nibbled contentedly on clover, while others hopped in circles, eager for whatever adventure the day might bring. The officers, unable to resist, wandered over to inspect the rabbits. General Bertrand, ever the tactician, studied the enclosures as if planning a campaign. General Duroc, more sentimental, knelt to offer a handful of lettuce to a particularly chubby bunny who accepted the treat with regal indifference. Festivities and friendly rivalries. Before the hunt, the officers indulged in a leisurely meal. Platters of roast chicken, bowls of strawberries, and towers of delicate pastries were passed from hand to hand. The wine flowed freely, and laughter echoed across the meadow as old friends shared stories of past campaigns and youthful misadventures. Napoleon, always keen to foster camaraderie, proposed a series of friendly wagers. Who would catch the first rabbit? Who would catch the most? Who would be outwitted by the cleverest bunny? The officers, never ones to shy away from a challenge, accepted with gusto, their competitive spirits awakened by the promise of glory and, perhaps, a golden carrot, rumored to be the day's prize. As the meal drew to a close, the servants cleared the tables and prepared the field for the main event. Nets and walking sticks were distributed, each one polished to a shine. The officers tested their equipment with mock seriousness, twirling nets and practicing their hunting stances to the amusement of their comrades. The rules of the hunt. Monsieur Fournier, the estate steward and unofficial master of ceremonies, stepped forward to explain the rules. His voice, usually reserved for matters of great importance, took on a theatrical tone as he addressed the assembled guests. Gentlemen, he began, today's hunt is a test of wit, agility, and good humor. The goal is not to harm our furry friends, but to enjoy the chase. Each officer will have a net and a walking stick. The bunnies will be released into the field, and you will have 30 minutes to catch as many as you can. At the end, the officer with the most rabbits will be declared the champion and awarded a prize worthy of the emperor's table. The officers nodded in agreement, some already plotting their strategies. General Bertrand, ever the planner, sketched a quick map of the field on a napkin, marking likely rabbit escape routes. General Duroc, less concerned with victory, simply hoped to catch one bunny and avoid embarrassment. Napoleon, for his part, declared that he would lead the first charge, much to the delight of his officers. Let it not be said, he proclaimed that the emperor is afraid of a little competition. The bunnies prepare. Meanwhile, in the enclosures, the rabbits sensed that something was afoot. Their ears perked up at the sound of laughter and the clink of glasses. Some pressed their noses to the slats, peering out at the field with bright, curious eyes. Others huddled together, whispering in the secret language of rabbits, perhaps plotting their own strategies for the coming chase. Lee Houdini, the legendary escape artist, was particularly restless. He paced his pen, testing the corners and eyeing the latch with practiced cunning. The dignified old doe, meanwhile, watched the proceedings with calm detachment, her years of wisdom telling her that humans were never as clever as they thought. The moment approaches as the hour of the hunt drew near. A sense of excitement filled the air. The officers gathered at the starting line, nets in hand, their faces a mixture of determination and barely suppressed laughter. The servants took their positions at the enclosures, ready to release the bunnies at the appointed signal. Napoleon, standing at the front, gave a rousing speech, half serious, half in jest. "Today, gentlemen, we face a most formidable foe. May your feet be swift, your nets steady, and your hearts light. Let the hunt begin." With a flourish, Monsieur Fournier raised his hand, and the signal was given. The servants flung open the doors of the enclosures, and the field was suddenly alive with movement, drifting into anticipation. But before we rush into the chaos, let us pause and savor this moment, the calm before the storm, the laughter before the chase. The field is bathed in sunlight. The air is filled with the scent of wildflowers, and the world seems for a brief instant perfectly at peace. The officers stand poised, ready for adventure. The bunnies, unaware of the legend they are about to create, prepare to leap into history. And somewhere just beyond the edge of the meadow, the first whispers of chaos are beginning to stir. As you close your eyes tonight, let your thoughts linger on this scene. The gentle rustle of grass, the bright flash of uniforms, the soft, steady thump of 100 rabbit hearts. Imagine the anticipation, the excitement, the promise of a day that will be remembered not for its victories or defeats, but for the joy of the chase and the laughter of friends. Let the memory of the royal rabbit hunt carry you into sleep. A reminder that history is not only made by battles and conquests, but by the moments of anticipation and delight that come before. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with sunlit fields, playful laughter, and the gentle magic of 1,000 happy bunnies. The sun had reached its golden peak, casting a warm, honeyed glow over the estate. The air shimmered with anticipation and the scent of wildflowers, bread, and roasted meats. The officers, resplendent in their uniforms, stood at the ready nets in hand, and laughter on their lips. The bunnies, nestled in their enclosures at the edge of the field, twitched their noses and waited, blissfully unaware that they were about to become the stars of one of history's most peculiar spectacles. The final preparations, Monsieur Fournier, the ever-dutiful steward, made one last round of the field. He checked The nets nodded approvingly at the arrangement of the tables and gave a reassuring smile to the servants standing by the rabbit pens. The officers gathered near the starting line, exchanging friendly jibes and last-minute strategies. General Bertrand, with a glint in his eye, whispered to General Duroc, "Remember, it's all about speed and cunning. The rabbits won't know what hit them." Napoleon himself stood at the front, his hat at a jaunty angle, his boots polished and his spirits high. "Gentlemen," he declared, "let us show these rabbits the discipline and determination of the French army." There were cheers and a few good-natured groans from the assembled officers. A hush fell over the meadow as Monsieur Fournier raised his hand. The servants moved to the enclosures, hands poised on the latches. The officers leaned forward, nets at the ready, hearts beating just a little faster. Even the bunnies seemed to sense that something unusual was about to happen. The moment of release. With a dramatic flourish, Monsieur Fournier dropped his hand. The servants flung open the doors of the enclosures, and, for a brief magical moment, time seemed to stand still. At first, there was a gentle rustling, a soft collective intake of breath from hundreds of rabbits. The bunnies peered out into the sunlight, their eyes wide and curious. Some took a tentative hop forward, their noses twitching as they sniffed the fresh air. Others lingered in the shadows, uncertain, their ears flicking nervously. Then, as if by some secret signal, the rabbits began to move. One by one, then in twos and threes, and finally in a great rolling tide, the bunnies surged out of their pens and into the open field. The bunny stampede. What happened next was a scene of gentle, slow-motion chaos, a ballet of fluff and fur of officers and rabbits, all set against the backdrop of a sunlit meadow. The first wave of bunnies hopped out with purpose, heading straight for the nearest patch of clover. The officers, caught off guard by the rabbits' speed and determination, lunged forward with their nets, only to find themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. The bunnies darted left, then right, then doubled back, with a nimbleness that left even the most seasoned campaigners baffled. General Bertrand, determined to prove his tactical genius, attempted to corral a group of rabbits into a corner. The bunnies, however, had other ideas. With a coordinated burst of energy, they scattered in every direction, leaving Bertrand spinning in place, his net waving helplessly in the air. General Duroc, more gentle in his approach, knelt down and tried to coax a particularly fluffy bunny into his arms. The rabbit regarded him with mild curiosity, then hopped away with a flick of its tail, leaving Duroc chuckling at his own folly. Across the field, similar scenes played out again and again. Officers chased rabbits, rabbits dodged officers, and the servants looked on in amusement, doing their best to keep track of the chaos. The bunnies take over. As the minutes passed, it became clear that the rabbits were not merely participants in the hunt. They were the undisputed masters of the field. Some bunnies formed small teams working together to outflank the officers and escape to the safety of the tall grass. Others, emboldened by their success, ventured closer to the picnic tables where the scent of bread and fruit proved irresistible. A particularly adventurous group of bunnies made a beeline for the dessert table, launching a coordinated assault on the strawberry tarts. The officers, momentarily distracted by the spectacle, could only watch as the rabbits nibbled contentedly, their whiskers dusted with powdered sugar. Napoleon, ever the strategist, attempted to rally his men. "Form a line," he called. "Don't let them break through." But the bunnies, undeterred by rank or reputation, slipped through the gaps with ease, their soft bodies moving like water around the obstacles in their path. Gentle mayhem and laughter. The field was soon alive with laughter and shouts of surprise. Officers tripped over their own feet, Nets tangled in the grass, and hats went flying as the bunnies continued their joyful romp. The servants, unable to contain their amusement, exchanged knowing glances and stifled giggles. One officer, having cornered a particularly wily rabbit, found himself outsmarted when the bunny simply hopped between his legs and disappeared into the crowd. Another, determined to catch at least one bunny, ended up chasing his own hat as a gust of wind sent it tumbling across the field. The bunnies, for their part, seemed to revel in the chaos. They darted and danced, their movements a blur of white, brown, and grey. Some paused to nibble on a stray carrot, others stopped to groom themselves in the middle of the action, utterly unconcerned by the commotion around them. A pause for reflection. As the initial frenzy began to subside, the officers gathered in small groups, catching their breath and sharing stories of near misses and clever escapes. Napoleon, brushing a bit of grass from his coat, could not help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. It seems he mused that the rabbits have studied our tactics and improved upon them. The servants began to collect the nets and tidy the field, while the bunnies, now thoroughly in command, lounged in the shade and enjoyed the spoils of their victory. The officers, humbled but in good spirits, congratulated one another on their efforts and vowed to do better next time. The afterglow of adventure. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the field returned to a state of peaceful contentment. The officers, their uniforms a bit rumpled and their pride a bit bruised, settled in for a well-earned rest. The bunnies, having proven their mettle, curled up in the grass and drifted off to sleep, their dreams filled with visions of endless meadows and unguarded dessert tables. The day's events would soon become the stuff of legend, retold and embellished with each telling. But for those who were there, the memory of the great bunny release would remain forever etched in their minds, a moment of pure, unbridled joy when the world was turned upside down by the softest of conquerors, drifting into sleep. As you close your eyes tonight, let your thoughts linger on that sunlit field, the gentle rustle of grass, the laughter of friends, the soft patter of 100 tiny feet. Imagine the bunnies, free and fearless, weaving their way through a world of adventure and delight. Let the memory of the great bunny release carry you into sleep. A reminder that history is not only made by battles and victories, but by the moments of gentle chaos and laughter that bring us together. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with open fields, playful rabbits, and the quiet magic of a world where anything is possible. The sun has long since set over the fields of France. The laughter and chaos of the emperor's picnic have faded into memory, leaving behind only the soft hush of night and the gentle breathing of 1,000 contented rabbits. The officers, once so determined and dashing, are now dozing in their chairs, their dreams filled with visions of fluffy adversaries and endless meadows. Even Napoleon himself, the mighty emperor, has traded his hat and boots for a quiet moment by the fire, a faint smile lingering on his lips. As the world grows still, let us pause and reflect on the curious day when history was written, not with swords or speeches, but with the soft patter of a bunny's feet. What gentle lessons might we carry from this most unlikely of tales? What wisdom wrapped in fur and whiskers might the bunny horde have left behind? Lesson 1. The power of the unexpected. Perhaps the first lesson is this: no matter how carefully we plan, the world has a way of surprising us. Napoleon, master of strategy and foresight, could never have predicted that his greatest challenge would come not from rival armies, but from a tide of rabbits. The officers, so sure of their skills, found themselves outwitted by creatures half their size. And yet, is this not the way of life? Just when we think we have everything under control, the unexpected arrives sometimes in the form of a challenge, sometimes as a delight. The Bunny Horde reminds us that surprises are not always to be feared. Sometimes they bring laughter, humility, and stories we will cherish forever. Lesson 2. The joy of laughter. There is a special kind of magic in laughter, especially the laughter we share with others. The officers, at first embarrassed by their defeat, soon found themselves swapping stories and jokes, their pride softened by the absurdity of it all. Napoleon too learned to laugh at himself, discovering that even the greatest among us are not immune to a little gentle ridicule. In the end, it was the laughter that lingered, the sound of friends united not by victory, but by a moment of shared silliness. The Bunny Horde, in their own quiet way, taught the Emperor's men that joy is often found in the most unexpected places, and that the best stories are those that end with a smile. Lesson 3. The wisdom of humility. Greatness does not always mean being the strongest, the fastest, or the most clever. Sometimes it means knowing when to step back, to accept defeat with grace, and to find wisdom in humility. The officers, humbled by their furry foes, discovered that dignity is not lost in laughter, but found in the willingness to admit one's own limits. Napoleon, who had faced the might of Europe, learned that true leadership is not about never failing, but about how one responds to failure. By embracing the humor of the moment, he showed his men that even emperors can be good sports. Lesson 4. The beauty of simple pleasures. Amid the grandeur of the imperial picnic, the fine food, the polished uniforms, the elaborate plans, it was the simplest things that brought the most joy. The warmth of the sun, the taste of fresh bread, the company of friends, and the sight of a rabbit nibbling on a strawberry tart. The Bunny Horde, unburdened by titles or ambitions, reveled in the pleasures of the moment. They chased, they nibbled, they played, and in doing so, reminded everyone present that happiness is often found in the simplest of things. Lesson 5. The stories we tell. As the days turned to weeks, and the weeks to years, the legend of the Bunny Horde grew. It became a story told at bedtime, a joke shared among friends, a gentle reminder that history is not only made by battles and treaties, but by moments of joy and folly. The tale was painted, sung, and acted out by children in village squares. It crossed borders and languages, becoming a meme before memes were ever invented. And through it all, the story endured, not because it was grand or heroic, but because it was true and funny and filled with heart. A world at peace now. As the world settles into sleep, let us imagine the field once more. The bunnies curled up in the grass, dreaming of carrot feasts and sunlit adventures. The officers, their uniforms set aside, resting in the gentle embrace of night. And Napoleon, the mighty emperor, at peace with himself and the world, his dreams filled not with conquest, but with the soft, persistent magic of 1,000 happy rabbits. Drifting into dreams, let your mind wander, dear listener, to that quiet field. Feel the cool night air, the softness of the grass, the gentle weight of a bunny in your lap. Let the worries of the day slip away, replaced by the memory of laughter, friendship, and the simple joy of being part of a story that will be told for generations. Remember, life is full of surprises, and the best ones often arrive when we least expect them. Whether you are an emperor or an ordinary soul, There is wisdom in humility, joy in laughter, and beauty in the simplest of pleasures. So, as you drift into sleep, let the lessons of the Bunny Horde carry you gently into your dreams. May you wake, refreshed, your heart a little lighter, and your spirit ready for whatever surprises tomorrow may bring. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with gentle fields, warm sunlight, and the quiet triumph of 1,000 happy bunnies.